Hi, this is BaanTu. This is our third video of the year. When I began this in January, my very first video was on the coronavirus and China. And the start of the Rave New Year in mid to late January coincided with more and more talk and more news coverage of the Wuhan flu. It wasn't even called COVID-19 at that point. And it certainly, when I did that video, it was suggesting an imprint for not just the year, but possibly for the decade into certainly this final 7-year cycle before 2027. But little did I expect the magnitude, the swiftness, the the complete changes that happened just up in seas, just on an earthquake level. And in fact, it's felt, and I've been comparing it to a slow motion 9/11 with limited movement, fear, terror, lack of air travel, no airplanes, concerns about safety at an all-time high, and security, and our whole mindset changed and altered by the violence that we saw on television in the media. And I kept referring it to a slow motion 9/11, and in fact it felt worse than that. And sure enough, when I looked at BaanTu, I looked at life cycles, and you'll see it on the left-hand side of the page. Life cycles refers to the 19-year cycle of the lunar nodes. And I looked at it, and I saw it is a repetition of exactly this period, September 2001. And things don't repeat perfectly when you look at this 19-year or so lunar node cycle. I'm rounding that number. Things don't repeat exact. There's a repetition, but with a twist, with a slight heightened tension, if you like, with new challenges that present itself to us as we kind of climb up the mountain of life and stair step our way. And certainly, this to me has presented new challenges being in this period, things that we could never imagine, and yet it feels very much like this September 2001 period. It's interesting too, just on a very personal level, a chance for you to look at your own life, not just the collective, not just these big themes, but your own life back then, or to plug in your own life cycle, something even more specific, but to just look at your life personally and professionally. What was going on back then? What were you feeling? What were you thinking? Are you back in that same place now? Have things altered? Has the scene of your life altered? Has the milieu? It's an opportunity when you're looking at BaanTu to stop and reflect on your own life if you wish to do that. It's interesting what does come up. But if we look at these larger prophecies, if you like, that Ra Uru who set out, there certainly has been in the last month or so a lot of talk in the human design world about the end of the cross of planning. And again, I don't know if any of this is true, but to me, this was very illustrative of just some of these, how much we are dependent on very sophisticated ways to plan and organize on the most seemingly minor things. And in the April 5th Sunday edition of the New York Times is this travel supplement on cruises, Regent, Seven Seas cruises, and European enchantment. And it's about 20 pages of beautifully photographed scenes of Europe and travel details and routes and prices and different tiers of how you want to travel. And this thing was put together months ago. Somebody decided the week before Easter and Passover to make sure that this supplement was in the paper. And you don't have to look so far to understand that it's not just our computers that take a lot of organization to make, with different parts made around the world and then put together in a factory in different materials, but it's on the most seemingly innocuous ways that planning and logistics are built into the very fabric of our life. And I'm sure Regent paid a small fortune to go ahead with this, And I don't need to tell you that, looking at the news, you don't really feel like going on cruises these days. I've also had a new take on inner authority, which I'll get into later, but I always wondered why Ra was banging the drum on inner authority and kind of doing what you wanted in a way. It seemed like this was very hippy dippy. It seemed like in the 80s people were doing that, and even the 90s, this sense of I'm going to do what I want to do. But I can see now in this heightened world of more security, more lockdowns, more groupthink, more social norms being enforced, that it is really, really difficult to exert your inner authority. Even doing this video, I part of me is concerned I'm going to say something that does not fit the mold here and is going to really anger somebody out there. Inner authority is basically the voice of your body, of your design, expressing its decision of what to do in life. Inner authority is the potential of your passenger to be able to articulate the experience of being and share it with others to provide a unique perspective. This is the beauty of mind, the expression of unique perception. And again, I'll revisit that. We are approaching, as I record this, and this is my second time recording it. I recorded it yesterday and there was a slight flaw in it. So if you did get this in your inbox and went to it and it was deleted, I'm sorry about that. But I am recording this again as we get even closer now to the cresting of the supermoon, which is at the point, it's the perigee, it's the point closest to the moon's orbit is closest to the moon, to the earth rather. So it's supposed to be very bright, it's supposed to be very big, and it's called the pink moon. And I really don't know why Farmer's Almanac calls it the pink moon here. It's actually golden. You can read more about it at some point. I really thought, though, by now that the lockdown would be over, that the pandemic would be over. And we are indeed seeing signs of the growth rate slowing down, but I really thought the lockdown would be over. It felt all like a dry run to me. So while you have some people going, oh my God, it is the end of cross-up planning, I don't know if it's the end of cross-up planning quite yet. Ra, I'm not talking about a biblical mystical end. This is the denouement that leads to the end. And I feel that with this. This is not the end, but it's getting closer. It's one of the final acts here. There's really a sense here that this is going to, life will continue after this is over, probably not ever the same way again. There is too much money to be made out of the middle classes, and they need to lard up some of these spending bills, at least in the US, with more protective and security measures, I think, which is why this is dragging out. But there was a feeling of, at least in March, that this was a drill, get back to your life, that this could be over. But I was really wrong about that. I'm leaving my notes in here just so you get a sense of my thinking. I was really off. I thought this might end with the next full moon. The news rapid fire since the full moon of March 9th. And so let's just take a look at where the moon is now to where it was a month ago. And right now, the moon, as it hits its peak later tonight in the east coast of America and into the early hours of the UK, it will be in gate 57, line 5, the gate of intuitive insight, the gentle, the extraordinary power of clarity, the tendency to keep on keeping on that can end up as a misguided missile. When in action, the intuition may become overwhelmed and unable to assess and evaluate its progress. And this is in the channel of survival, of instinct, of very individual channel. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of, if it does, express itself in the collective. If we compare this now to March 9th, the full moon was in gate 47, line 3, and this was in Virgo. So the full moon today in April is in Libra, about relationships. It was in Virgo last month in gate 47, the gate of realizing oppression, a restrictive and adverse state as a result of internal weakness or external strength, or both. Now keep in mind, after this, and again, this was the full worm moon, after this is when Italy started lockdown, and one state after another in America started a lockdown and did really the unthinkable, closed the economy down here, closed it down. And there was no forewarning to it. It just came as a thunderbolt in the days that followed that. And the earth, the full worm moon, according to Old Farmer's Almanac, it has to do with earthworms and grubs tend to emerge from their winter dormancy at this time of year, marking a sure sign of spring. So things coming out from dormancy. And I think you could say the strong arm of the law coming out of dormancy. And really, I'm going to say no more. You're talking about a gate of oppression, and then line 3 of self-oppression. And again, the news that followed got very oppressive. What was interesting at the time of this March full moon, March Madness, was that Neptune, the planet that represents misinformation, was in opposition to this full moon of oppression. So all the news we were getting, the media, Neptune represents the media, entertainment, deception, guile, manipulation, was conjunct the sun, opposing this moon. And it was in gate 22, the openness, gate of openness, a quality of behavior best suited in handling mundane and trivial situations. If you look at the line it was in, line 2, the ability to successfully delude oneself and others, the possibility to attract others with an emotional style. And you could really argue, how much were we being deluded then, if at all? I don't know. I'm raising the question based on this. But even so, just even asking questions now and treating news skeptically is seen as a complete betrayal to the collective good. And there's this real tension now between the two. We have had in the last month new norms of how to exist, with toilet paper being the end-all be-all, somebody hoarding to extreme measures, a woman wrapping her face, is this why they needed the toilet paper after all? And also speaks to this sense of social distancing, this sense of social isolation. And I have to say, I find the term social distancing absolutely odious. To be distancing ourselves socially is not exactly what keeps our immune system in check. But I digress. And then you have this little cartoon of a little boy trying to play whack-a-mole and the mole popping up. It's just me today. Everyone else is working remotely. So again, our lives have changed completely. We're totally obsessed now with this idea of physically keeping in isolation. And even on social media, it's affecting things, and even communications. I mean, people are almost afraid to make a call to people. And we are people who do need people for lots and lots of reasons. Humanity has this vain concept of hierarchies. It's always the crystals that are closest to you, the one in front of you and behind you. In other words, it is the people in your life. It's the people closest to you. It's the environment. It's the people. And I mean, what happens when you are starved with your environment and your people? And you are relying on news online and social media and media. Does that distort fractals? Does that already add to this observation that the quality of information we receive is retarding? Ross says, information flows down fractal lines. Let's say that I have some knowledge and you're on my fractal. Then you get the knowledge. You again have someone on your fractal line that gets the knowledge from you, and so forth, as long as the fractal line goes. And are we having a distortion here when we're just by ourselves all day long, online, randomly flicking through Twitter posts and feeds and everything else? How much of that is conditioning us? How much are these pressures on the transit field since the start of the year, really just overwhelming things. And again, I've used this quote in my last two videos, and I'm going to say it again. The quality of the information we receive is retarding. So, everyone's got strong opinions on something, on information that is not very good. And we'll go through some of this very quickly now. I mean, I could do a presentation on just all the contradictions and how numbers don't add up. And let's just look at a few here. And again, you could look at any official. I'm not pointing any of this out with any political purpose. You could look at anybody, the WHO, UN, out of Europe, anything, but I'm going to just stick here in the US because I am here. So you have Dr. Fauci, who is the chief epidemiologist of the White House. He's been in many presidential administrations. He said on February 17th, risk of coronavirus in U.S. is minuscule. Skip mask and wash hands. And then on March 29th, he is here saying, quoted as saying, up to 100,000 to 200,000 lives could be lost in America due to it. So what changed in 5 weeks? We have another quote, 15 days to slow the spread, with the president here saying, look, we're going to be open. And again, that had me also thinking, well, hey, maybe by April 7th, the full moon, we'll have a whole full moon cycle, things will be open. That would sort of fit. And no. How 15 days became 45. Trump extends guidelines to slow coronavirus, and you can better believe that there's a chance this is going to extend even longer, possibly till May at this point. Some astrologers are thinking this is going to go on to some form through September. And I don't know. I really don't know. But again, it's just giving you a sense of the contradictions. The Spectator, April 1st, noting here, as of today, there are no reports of hospitals being overwhelmed, not even in London. And yet I've seen people now talking about overwhelmed ICU units with young people in it, which is a complete deviation from the obituaries I see and the death statistics I saw out of China in Italy, where this was with the older person's problem, so to speak. So again, I don't know what to believe. I really don't. I read the quickly here too, UK furious over China's coronavirus disinformation campaign against US. A picture of Boris Johnson, who late last night was revealed to now be in ICU himself after his coronavirus symptoms worsened. Again, I don't know what to believe. I do, there's a lot of fear and, again, disinformation. And to be clear, disinformation means when a party, a person, a country is actively spreading false information. They know the information's false, they're spreading it anyway. Misinformation, it just means there's an error in the facts, that it's not accurate. It's not intentional. It happens in the line of reporting and meeting deadlines that, you are not going to get everything factually correct, but you don't mean to. It's just what's known at the time, what you can do. Okay, but this is disinformation. Someone purposely is spreading disinformation here. Okay, and there's more stories. Again, I could go on and on and on and on. We have Dr. Fauci again, who is February 28th, who wrote something that kind of contradicts all his very dire modeling here. And it was in the New England of Medicine, and I came across this through Green Med Info. And again, it's a really great site run by doctors who are presenting medicine, germ theory, and in an alternative way, and debunking some of the myths in the media now about how these things actually work. And I am not an expert. I am not a scientist at all. But Dr. Fauci writes here, if one assumes that the number of asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic cases is several times as high as the number of reported cases, the case fatality rate may be considerably less than 1%. Okay, So he goes on, this suggests that the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 may ultimately be more akin to those of severe seasonal influenza. Again, this was all written February 28th, and I really suggest you take a look at it here. I don't have time or the remit to delve into it. Again, it's to illustrate the point that there is a lot of conflicting information, even from the experts. Even from the experts. I read obituaries all the time anyway, and I've been really reading them in this cycle, and out of Chicago and New York City. And you really get a sense a lot of the people who are dying of coronavirus were overweight, had health issues. I'm not going to get into all of this. There's some examples here. Some are already very old and suffered from pneumonia, and whether it was coronavirus that did it or whether coronavirus was just found in the body, I don't know. It's not really clear. This woman is one of the younger ones cited as dying from it, but she was a nurse with respiratory problems. So it's a different case than just an average 36-year-old. It was kind of unusual that on March 31st, with the Tribune reporting 26 new deaths in Illinois, and yet their obituary page and obit had 0 people who died of the virus that day. And again, here are some people who did die. And it really jumped out at me how old they were. I mean, of just dying of so many different things: Alzheimer's, heart disease, cancers, kidney problems. Every day I read the obituary, there are people who are over 100 dying. So it just puts things in perspective. This story also put things in perspective. An obituary here of a younger man, who died through taking his own life. And the family really wrestling with why this happened, but the global pandemic and the lockdown not helping his situation. So again, there are fallouts and human tolls in many countless ways we've not even begun to know yet. But again, it's how much can you say this now without having your head handed back to you as being uncaring? I thought this was an interesting article here because, and I've read a couple of them, that a husband and wife may have traveled, they come back, the husband has coronavirus, but not the wife, or the wife gets it, but not the husband. And so again, that's confusing. If it's as infectious as they're saying, how do 2 people living together, only one gets it and one doesn't? It doesn't explain everything. This was interesting in the Tribune editorial section, putting again what we're going through in some perspective. And I hadn't realized this, but they say more American soldiers died from influenza during World War I than from battle wounds in a pandemic that killed upward of 50 million people worldwide. Death by epidemic remained a natural, if depressing, part of American life until just a few generations ago. The unfettered optimism surrounding the era of Jonas Salk and the miracle drugs was understandable, if somewhat premature. The U.S. had recently survived a depression and won a 2-front global war. There's a reason we're emotionally unprepared for what may lie ahead. We simply haven't experienced the extreme cycles of infectious disease that previous generations were forced to endure. And I think too, if you look at the Rave New Year chart, you can see that there's quite a bit, and even now in some of these charts, there's quite a bit of the abstract in here, the experiential, things we haven't lived through before. And certainly on an astrological level, things we haven't seen play out for, since the 1300s. This leads to another side-by-side story on the front page, that the pandemic tempts leaders to seize sweeping powers. Never let a good crisis go to waste is a maxim often repeated in American life. With, this is the time to either hide news, bury news, exploit your agenda, pass things, bills and laws that would never ever see the light of day when things are calm and people are cool and collected. Certain governments have a set of desired powers ready to go in case of emergency or crisis, which is this United Nations experts here quoted in the story. They draft laws in advance and wait for the opportunity of the crisis to be presented. And, there's a lot of talk that the Patriot Act here will be renewed in America, which will be continuing this onerous surveillance measures that were put in place after 9/11. So anyway, this story, and again, I recommend it when you have time to just pause it, read through it, Google it. Again, to mention these things, and there's tons of theories on 5G. I'm not even going to get into it. But again, to just simply bring it up, you're derided, humiliated, put down, shut up, greeted with a lot of hostility. And so, where's the civil liberties, our freedom of speech? You can see here just one exchange out of dozens I could go through on Twitter. Howard Rourke, too, no doubt a reference to the Ayn Rand character. This virus has already been through Southern Cal, and the region was not shut down because nobody knew what the mysterious spike in pneumonia was. In Jan and Feb, 80% of the workers in my local grocery store got pneumonia. Irvine, California population is 50% over Asian, with many from mainland China. So it's his observation from his perspective on the ground. Take it or leave it. It's what he's presenting. And he's greeted with this. Bebo Space Cowgirl, this is sufficient data for everyone who isn't a sociopath. And she has the chart of the deaths. And again, it's really hard to have a dialogue, debate, conversation, have an exchange of information when you have these heightened fear factors going on. And again, this kind of group think, which makes having our inner authority even more difficult in this environment. This is another Twitter post. As a small business owner living week to week, I feel lazy, hopeless, and useless being closed. Okay, it's his subjective viewpoint. As a human, however, it's better for everyone to stay away from exposure. So he's really censoring, he's really checking his feelings, he's really choking off the emotions and conceptualizing, using logic to then moralize. And obviously he's very upset. He's got a father-in-law dying. And then he says, don't rush to reopen America. So, wow, there's a lot of different things going in here. But at the end, he has, don't rush to reopen America. Instead of just allowing the feelings to happen, the emotions, observing what's going on in life. And there's a real implicit judgment that, he's not human for feeling this way. I feel lazy and hopeless. As a human, however, why is it better for everyone to stay away from exposure? I mean, how do we know this? How do we know anything, really? We can only go by our own instinct, our own intuition, which again is what I believe Ra was trying to say with inner authority, and of course dressing it up with very complicated language. But it's intuition, it's our instinct. It's the only thing that can guide us in these times of bad information. And furthermore, just a little insight on the immunity issues here. Is it so much the virus or everyone's individual immune system? I came across this quote when I was re-listening to The Closing of the Door by Ra. Our immune system, the global immune system, is deteriorating so quickly. You can see this onrush of the antiviral madness. We have a world filled with antiviral madness because we are not equipped anymore, because our species is no longer fertile. And he goes on to say, humans have been evolving this way recently because we've been inside more, we've been stripped of natural light, we are not moving as much, we're not active as much physically. And this all does weaken the immune system. And so I asked the question, being in your house more with less movement, how is that going to help our immune system? Again, you can't even ask the question without expecting hostility from some quarters. At what cost our freedom? How will costs for security and safety affect our inner world, our inner life, our imagination? How will this affect our freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom to feel, freedom to commune, to intuit, to believe, to want, the freedom to need, the freedom without fear? At what cost, even when we get out of this? What will have been chipped away of that? And this inner authority of ours, our instinct? Are we not going to trust that even more and just put everything into the hands of experts, which have given very contradictory news? And this is, again, reflects to the bargain, which is so integral to this idea of the cross of planning ending, this channel 1949, which I talked about in the last video. There has never been a greater enslavement in the history of humanity than the slavery that comes from this bargain of security from the community. And I will leave it on that note. I send this in a lot of love and just trying to, again, put things in perspective and just share some of what I've studied and my observations. I'm not saying I believe everything Ross said. I'm not saying it's even true. I find this a really interesting lens in which to view current events and current affairs. Thank you so much. And please subscribe, like, share if you find any of this of any value. Bye-bye.